This episode is a bit of a wrap-up of the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast for 2020, a bit of a reflection on where we've been, what we've covered, a few stats, and where we're going as a podcast and as a community. But what I would really love is if you've got a couple of minutes and you could just send me an email or a message and tell me what you've enjoyed about the podcast, something that perhaps I haven't covered that you'd like covered, just some feedback. That would be fantastic. I'd really appreciate that. Will help me make the podcast even better for next year. So thanks so much and enjoy this final episode. Welcome to Let's Talk Thyroid, where we explore different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, to help you thrive and not just survive. Join me, Annabel Bateman, your host, and let's talk thyroid. Hello everyone and welcome to the final episode of Let's Talk Thyroid for 2020. I can't believe we're up to episode 30. So we started in June. I've put out a weekly episode ever since then. So up to episode 30 today. And who'd have thought at the beginning of the year, starting a podcast was not on my vision board, was not on my to-do list. It was vaguely on my radar, but wasn't what I thought I had in mind. But let's face it, 2020 has caused all of us to rethink things and do things a bit differently to perhaps how we thought it would all play out at the beginning of the year. And so what I had thought, maybe not right at the beginning of the year, but after I went to a Christian Women in Business conference in February, I got a pretty clear direction that it was time to own the thyroid health and wellness space as a niche and not just try to be everyone to everything. And so my word for the year for 2020 has been intentional. So I knew that I wanted to be intentional. I knew that I needed to focus my attention and the way I was doing things, but I didn't realize that a podcast was going to be on the agenda. I did think about writing a book. That was probably more on my agenda, but Lee and I had agreed that I wasn't going to take on any big project in the first half of the year. And, as it all transpired, I guess that was when we had a bit of learning from home. But in amongst that time, I started to think about the podcast idea. And I was working on my business and just refocusing or working out how to focus in that first part of the year. And the idea of a podcast came up, and I did some research. How do you start a podcast? And one of the tips from one of the websites I came across was see if you can write down a list of 10 topics that you could talk about, or, that would be episodes. And so I started writing, and I think I came up with 55 topics without really thinking about it, without really kind of digging to the bottom of the barrel. And I thought, okay, I think there is enough content for a podcast. And look, we're up to episode 30. I've still got many more of those 55 or whatever I came up with that we haven't explored yet, or that we could explore with different people or in more detail. So I feel like we're just getting going. That's how I feel after this year. I feel like I'm on a roll. I feel like you guys are, I'm getting great feedback that you're enjoying the podcast, that you're finding it helpful, that it's helping you maybe get to the bottom of whether you even have a thyroid condition or not, or different ways that you can look at managing your thyroid health. And so I love getting messages from you to let me know what you think, what episode you really enjoy, what you would like to hear more of on the podcast. I love hearing your stories, and so I definitely want to be doing more of that. So I just thought what we would do is a quick recap of what we have done this year. I want to give you a few stats. I think that's maybe a bit of fun, just to see where we're going and where we've come from. You might see where you fit into some of these stats. So we started in June. This episode is going live on the 17th of December, and this will be episode 30. So up until today, so over the 29 episodes, we have had 4,654 downloads. I actually had a goal fairly recently that we'd get to 4,500, so we well exceeded that. Could be close to the 5,000 by the end of the year, which would be pretty cool. So that's on average 160 listens per episode, and I think that's amazing. I think if you're one of those 160 people that are listening on a regular basis, I want to thank you because this is what keeps me going. 30% of you listen through Apple Podcasts and 25% through Spotify. So they're the top two platforms, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The most popular episode to date has been episode 7, which is the interview with my doctor, Dr. Ellen App Thomas. So that at 287 downloads. So that's definitely a popular one. If you're listening to this, you've probably listened to that one. And I think that is a good overview and a good place to start. Actually, what's interesting is that all of the most popular, or the top 5 or 6 most popular episodes, are some of the older ones. And so my guess is that when people are discovering the podcast, I know many of you are actually starting at the beginning and listening your way through, not necessarily in order, but trying to actually get, try and actually listen to, more or less most of the podcast episodes. So I love that. Thank you for going back, because there's some real gems in some of those earlier episodes. And certainly if you go right back to the beginning, you'll see what my heart is when I started this, what my vision for the podcast is, and, some of those foundational things. So I have been somewhat deliberate, particularly in some of the earlier episodes, about laying a bit of a foundation for my approach to managing my own thyroid health, establishing, I guess what a thyroid wellness lifestyle is, and some of the key tenets to that. From where do people listen? Aside from, I think I told you before about the Apple Podcasts and Spotify, 61% of you are in Australia, which, given that I'm in Australia, that's not hugely surprising, but that means that 40% or 39% of you are all around the world. And I know we've had listeners as far as Iceland. There are definitely listeners on every continent bar Antarctica. So I think that's really amazing. We do live in such a global community. Next to Australia, we've got 22% listeners in the US. So hello to all of you, wherever you're listening, whether you're next door to me in Brisbane, or you're in Iceland or Finland or the UK or the US, or in Africa, Asia, wherever you are. Love having you as part of the podcast. In terms of the topics that we've covered, look, we've already spoken to medical doctors, neurologists, Chinese medicine doctors, a few naturopaths. We've covered different aspects of food and thyroid health. We've covered some boundary setting and some of that more emotional side of things. We've talked about Graves' disease, Hashimoto's. We haven't yet covered things like thyroid cancer and thyroidectomies. So definitely there are aspects of thyroid health that, I don't have personal experience with, but would like to include on the show at some point down the track. So there's still so much more that we can cover. So let's just chat about what the future entails for the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast and the Let's Talk Thyroid community. I would love to have more of the same, in the sense of I really would like the podcast to maintain being a bit of a mix of you sharing your stories, just normal people with thyroid conditions sharing their stories with other people, because one of the reasons that I started this is that 1 in 8 women have a thyroid condition throughout their life, and many, 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 many do not know it. So the more that we spread awareness, the more that we brave up and share our stories, the more that we can help each other and the people who aren't even listening to the podcast, because it just raises awareness. And my story is not your story. And so whilst there might be elements of my story that you resonate with and that you can learn from, there's certainly aspects that you won't relate to at all. And so the more of us that share our stories, the more that we can sort of pick and choose and think, oh yeah, I like, that sounds more like me, or yes, I've experienced that. Maybe I should try what that person's tried. So definitely want to hear from have more of your stories on the podcast. So if you would like to share your story, then please send me an email, hello@annabelbateman.com. I would love to be in touch and see if we can have a chat for the podcast. I definitely have a list of various experts in the field of thyroid health that I would love to interview for the podcast. So there are people, I guess, on my hit list. There are topics that I would like covered that I think do need experts that I'll be on the lookout for. But if you come across someone, whether you're following them on Instagram or you find another podcast or you read a book, then please, and you think, oh, that person, Annabel should talk to that person, please let me know. Again, send me an email or a message through social media. I've come across a couple of great people that I've already interviewed this year on the podcast in that way, that either I've just stumbled across them or other people have recommended them. And so I would really appreciate that. And I think that, again, helps us to expand our reach in being able to help people. So that's some of what the podcast will be. Obviously, I'll keep sharing some of my experiences or topics that I feel, things that have worked for me or things that I haven't, but really would love to talk to more of you and to more experts. So please let me know. Now, in terms of the podcast for next year, I think I've mentioned this in one of the previous episodes. We're going to go to fortnightly episodes at least for the first part of next year, for a couple of reasons. One is I have learnt that putting out a weekly podcast is a really big effort, which I've loved doing, and I've gotten into a great routine with it, and I think I like that frequency, and I think from a listener point of view, probably that reliability and consistency is nice. But one of the things I am committed to doing next year is writing a book. I've got a cookbook out already that really probably is more than a cookbook. It's got a lot of my thyroid story as it was 5 years ago. It's got lots of tips and tricks for eating in a way that is supportive generally of thyroid health, as well as lots of recipes. And so the next book will be definitely thyroid focused. It will be many of the things that we talk about on the podcast, and we'll hopefully include some of your stories that are on the podcast and some of the information shared by the various experts. But it will be along the lines of living that thyroid lifestyle and how to actually do that. So there will be recipes there will be tips and tricks, there will be information about essential oils and different recipes and blends, there will be lots about mindset and affirmation and dealing with some of the deep-seated emotions that sit behind our health issues. But my goal is that it's bright, that it's positive, that it's practical, that it is probably going to be directed at someone reasonably early on in their thyroid journey, or someone who's maybe known they've had thyroid for a long time but has just been doing the mainstream, just taking the medication. So certainly new to managing their thyroid health from that holistic point of view. So that's probably who I'm writing it for, because we know that it can be very overwhelming when you first diagnose or you're trying to figure it out as to where do I start, what do I do. So we're told by, some of our integrative doctors and naturopaths, this is what you have to do. My goal for the book is to show you how to do that and to build things into your daily routine in a way that's not overwhelming, that's doable, that's broken down in a way that you can do it over time. So that's my goal. I'll probably be asking for lots of feedback in the Let's Talk Thyroid Facebook community over the next, 4 or 5, 6, 12 months, however long it's going to take, for topics you'd like to see covered, or I'll definitely be asking for feedback. But the long and the short of how that relates to the podcast is I have to manage my own thyroid health, and I just don't have the capacity to put out a weekly podcast and write a book at the same time. So my plan is fortnightly podcasts, and I think then I can manage the time management side of that without getting myself overwhelmed, overcommitted, stressed and unwell. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think maybe that slower pace will mean that if you haven't listened to all the episodes, you can go back and fill in the gaps, or go re-listen to some of the episodes that you've found really helpful, because I know if you're anything like me, sometimes the brain fog doesn't allow me to retain all the information, and that re-listening, you'll hear different things at different points in time, or just to go back over things can be really helpful. The other thing to keep an eye out for in the new year, or hopefully in the first few months of the year, is the launch of my thyroid affirmation cards. I've called them thyroid love notes. They're all written, they're all ready to print, just waiting for a good printing deal so that I can get them to you at a really great price. So stay tuned for that. And the other thing to look out for that I will be running in February is the next round of my Kickstart Your Thyroid Wellness 30-Day Challenge. We ran one in September. My goal will be to run them in February and September, possibly one in sort of May, but definitely there will be one in February. So that is a great opportunity to really kickstart a thyroid wellness lifestyle. That's the goal, is that we're looking at food and those foods that is good to, at least as a starting point to look at for thyroid wellness. We look at mindset. We incorporate essential oils if you'd like to do that. And we do it in a community of people who are all going through it at the same time. So that 30 days is like a bit of a hardcore focus, but implementing things that you can maintain then as part of your day-to-day lifestyle that is supportive of your thyroid health. So stay tuned for that one you'll start hearing about it in January, but we'll run it in February. If you would like to support the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast and getting the message of positive and practical thyroid wellness out to the broader community, you are very welcome to donate via PayPal on my website. Absolutely no requirement to do that, but if you would like to contribute in that way, then that would be fabulous. More than happy to receive that and put it into things like my podcasting hosting and social media costs, that type of thing. That would be great. If you have been listening now till pretty much the end, I'm about to wrap up, I would love to give you a little gift. It's something that I've made and had for a little while. I've just not been too sure how to use them. But for now, if you've been listening, if you're listening to this episode and you would like a little Christmas gift from me, then please send me an email, hello@annabelbateman.com, with your name and postal address, and I will get a little something out to you in the post over the next few weeks. Thanks again for being part of my Let's Talk Thyroid community this year. Really looking forward to you being part of it next year. If you're actually not in the Facebook group or on my email list, then please join. That is another way I can communicate with you. We can share information. You can share with each other, particularly in the Facebook community. You can ask questions. You can share your own experiences, because like I said before, that's much more helpful than me just sharing my experiences. So both the links to that are on my website. If you just go to Annabel Bateman, ANNABELBATEMAN.com, you'll find a link to the Facebook group, and you'll also find a link there to sign up for my newsletter if you would rather do that. I send out a weekly wrap-up, I suppose, of what's on the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast and the odd other little bits and pieces. But for now, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas, a calm and peaceful Christmas with your family and friends, and a wonderful new year. Let's all say goodbye to 2020 and welcome in 2021. Stay tuned for the launch of 2021 Let's Talk Thyroid podcast in mid-January, and I've got lots of exciting things planned for you. Thanks so much and have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with others that you know with thyroid problems. Let's get the message out there. If you'd like to connect with me further, the best place to do that is via my website, annabelbateman.com. From there, you'll be able to join my Facebook group, book a strategy session with me, download my freebie, and access any show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.